Today we have 4 of the scariest ghost stories taken from Reddit. I'm your host, Severed Soul. Reddit user Flavio Acio, tenant ghost. I'm a landlord. I own 2 small houses next to mine, so I rent them out to families. One of my tenants was the 50-year-old economist who's been renting from me for about 10 years and lives with his son and his elderly mother. Last Tuesday, I arrived home from work at around 5 p.m. and I saw an ambulance outside of his house. I could see them loading him onto the ambulance, and the rest of the family, even some of the nephews that I know, were rushing to their cars to follow behind the ambulance. Naturally, I sent the guy's son a text message to say that I hope his father recovers soon. The next day, I got to work early, but forgot some of my paperwork at home, so I decided to use my lunch break to go home and get them. As I approached my driveway, I could see my tenant, the guy that was taken to hospital the day before. He was shirtless on the sidewalk, talking angrily to someone on his cell phone. This was fairly normal behaviour for him. He had a bad temper and would often pace in front of his house while talking to someone on his cell phone. All I could presume at this point was that perhaps the medical issue was no big deal and that he was back on his feet again. I got my papers from the house and left, not giving the incident a second thought. On Friday, my mother asked me if I'd heard anything about the tenant, as she heard that he'd passed away in hospital. I told her that that wasn't possible, as I'd seen him going strong the next day. On Saturday, the guy's son called me. He told me that his father had passed away in hospital on a Wednesday and that they were vacating the house. My step-grandma, who lives a couple houses down the street, told me that she also saw him the same day I did. She also said he was talking on his phone on the sidewalk, and it was around midday, in plain sight. Did I see a ghost? Reddit user NamelessGhoul661. I have a normal experience from 2018 that still sticks with me to this day. So as the title says, I had an experience in 2018 that still sticks with me to this day. I've had more since then, so if you'd like me to read more of my experiences, I'll gladly share. So, it was July 2018. I was lying in my bed around 6:30 to 7 a.m. It was light enough in my room so I could make out certain shapes and the TV and such. As I was scrolling through my phone, I saw this human-shaped figure peek over the edge of my bed. I didn't really think too much of it at the time, kinda like, did I really just see that? Then, as I tried to get a good look at it, the thing just disappeared. I didn't think much more of it, and decided to go to sleep. The following night, as I was gaming in the living room, as I usually do, my sister's cat started acting weird, so I decided to see what was going on. There were these flowers that we had hanging up that we'd kept from my dad's adopted father's funeral from 4 years prior. As we let the cat check the flowers out more closely, she began to hiss and swipe at the flowers aggressively. Immediately after, I was overwhelmed by a sudden feeling of dread. I felt like I needed to burst into tears, for no reason whatsoever. I couldn't think of anything that would be affecting my emotions in such a negative way. I just remembered what I'd seen early the morning before, and maybe this thing was making itself known. The next few nights, the experiences grew more and more intense. One night in particular, I kept hearing these incoherent voices, and then I saw another figure. This time, the thing stood around 7 feet tall. I was grabbed numerous times throughout the night by a cold hand, and I could feel the same cold hands brushing against my arm. And there was an ominous feeling, as if I was being watched, and so on. I decided to sleep in my living room over the next 2 weeks, as I was feeling so stressed out by the whole situation. I gave up on trying to sleep in my own room, and eventually, this thing, whatever it was, just suddenly disappeared, thankfully. I do remember hearing that spirits can pass their emotions on to those close to them before they pass away. Maybe that's what happened here. I never met my dad's adopted father, so I don't know what he was like as a person. But judging from the things I've been told about him, I don't think he was the nicest person early on in life, until years just before he passed. I was 19 at the time of the incident, so thinking about it to this day still really creeps me out. Reddit user Wonderful Drop 8538 Encounter with my mother. My first time posting here, and I've told this story to several people over the years, but thought I'd tell it again. I always get chills when I tell it, and I'm having them again. I'm in my early 60s now, and I'll never forget what happened. So here's some backstory first. This happened in 1999, after my mother had passed away. We were extremely close. She was in her 70s at the time, had a history of illness and hospital stays. I lived about a 6-hour drive from my parents back then. I had called my mother for Mother's Day, and she told me that she'd been in hospital. I asked why she hadn't told me sooner, and she said because there was nothing that I could have done. I told her at the very least I could have come down and spent some time with her. Anyway, the rest of the conversation was pretty normal, and it soon ended. On May 13th, her primary physician called me from work. He'd never done this before. He told me that my mother wasn't doing well and that she was back in hospital. He informed me that if I wanted to see my mother alive, I needed to get to the hospital ASAP. My significant other and I both work for a major airline, and we carpooled to work. So I called and explained, and said we needed to go home to get my stuff ASAP, so I could catch a flight to go and be with my mother. We got to the airport and tried to board a flight, but the weather was really bad that day. Lots of thunderstorms. It came down to the last flight of the night, which they cancelled because of the weather. So they told me to make sure I was back first thing in the morning to catch the first flight, and they'd make sure I got a seat. Not sure why I didn't drive down, but at the time I think I was just overwhelmed with the situation. That's something I'll always regret. We got up really early for the first flight, and we made it to the airport. Just as we were pulling into the garage parking space, one of my sisters called to inform me that my mother had just passed. I was devastated to say the least, and they got me on a flight. I was a complete mess the entire way home, as I tried my best to fight back the tears. By the time we landed and I drove to my parents' house, I was a complete disaster. One of my older sisters and I were responsible for the funeral arrangements, and we got those made. I was a mess at the viewing and the funeral. Needless to say, everything went off without a hitch, and I made it back home. Life went on. About 6 months had passed since her death when the experience happened. My partner at the time and I were at Lowe's in the middle of the afternoon. Lowe's only have 2 sets of doors, an exit and an entrance, and I had parked my SUV just down from the exit doors. We got what we needed and checked out, and this is where things get creepy. As we were going through the exit doors, I stopped dead in my tracks while the doors were wide open. I looked down the parking lot and I could see my car. My mother was sitting in the front seat. She looked exactly like she had numerous times when I would take her shopping at the mall. Her hair was done, very high and jet black at the time. Makeup on and teeth in place. She had dentures, but she hardly ever wore them because they caused her a lot of pain. She was looking straight ahead. All I could see was a profile view, and I couldn't really see what she was wearing at the time. While I was standing in the middle of the open doors at Lowe's, the conversation between me and my significant other was as follows. Me: do you see that? Significant other: see what? Me: my mother. She's sitting in the front seat of my car. Significant other: no, I don't see anything, but we need to go, we're standing in the middle of the doors. After another minute, frozen in place, We continued walking out, and the doors closed behind us. I was scared out of my mind as we continued to walk towards the car. Once we got there, she had vanished, and I never saw her again. I can only assume that she came to say goodbye, or to tell me that everything was okay. I truly believe that she visited me that day, and I consider it an honour that I was able to see her one last time. Reddit user Embarrassed Sort 5377. I was warned. My work as a security guard. I worked for a while in security, and would often hear my colleagues talk about a specific haunted school. This was the one school that literally all of my colleagues hated working at because of the creepy things that had happened there. Naturally, I started to ask questions, but they just fobbed me off with short phrases like, "Dude, it's just seriously freaking haunted there." And you'll see what we mean as soon as the alarms start to go off. So a year goes by and I'm assigned to a school, totally forgetting about the stories of a haunted school. Around 1 AM, the fire alarm in the school triggers, falsely, which is actually pretty common. I head over to the panel and turn off the alarm system, then proceed to check the fire system. It seemed to be a mechanical fault. So, I followed the usual protocol, which was to just call an engineer. Yes, we have the night shift emergency kind because a fire alarm is high risk. I call dispatch to summon an engineer, and then I sit down in the janitor's hall inside this ginormous building. From here, I could view all the cameras throughout the school, and this was also where the fire panel was located. I took out my phone and decided to watch a movie while I waited for the engineer to arrive. So I'm sitting in this little room in the janitor's hall, but right next to it is the student common room, which is huge. It's a massive open square space which consists of multiple levels. Needless to say, sound echoes around in there like crazy. I was watching the movie, but my eyes kept diverting all the time to the cameras. I swear, out of the corner of my eye, I could see something changing there all the time while I wasn't looking. And then suddenly, I noticed on one of the camera screens, the light in the basement was on. This was creepy as hell, because I know it wasn't on before, and in such an old building they definitely didn't have motion detector sensors. I decided to walk out into the common room to keep an eye on things, and to listen out for any strange noises or sounds. There was nothing. Complete silence. Not even a sound from outside can be heard at this point, which is also pretty strange, as the school is dead centre of a busy city. The moment I turned to walk back into the janitor's room, I heard a sound so loud, I jumped and froze on the spot. It sounded like a table had been thrown through the school. Imagine the echo it left through those crazy-sized halls. The hairs on the back of my neck began to stand on end. Sometimes you get a jump scare that's so bad, the veins in your body all start to tighten so fast, it's actually painful. This was such a moment. I listened carefully, and it fell silent for about 10 seconds. I slightly unfreeze again, but all my body sensors are going off. I'm 100% on high alert and tense as hell. That's when I start hearing everything around me. Footsteps on the upper halls. People talking, doors slamming, and tables and chairs scraping along the floor. The sounds were definitely from inside the building and coming from the upper floors. That's it. Fuck it. Every part of my body at the moment is telling me to get out of there. Every physical feeling in my body was telling me that this was unsafe. I rushed to the alarm system, which was next to a little window where I could see the janitor's room. I could see the camera screens, and the lights in the basement were going bonkers, from turning on and off and going brighter and dimmer. I didn't even care at this point about the engineer who'd just been called to get out of bed. I just needed to save my own ass. I turned on the alarm, ran out the door, and drove away. As I was driving away, the engineer called me to say, "Hey bud, listen up, you're probably the new guy, but at night I don't go into that school, and you shouldn't either. That place is haunted like crazy. Even the other security guards won't go in there at night." That's when I realised this was the damn school they were all talking about. The engineer wished me a good shift and told me that he was going back to sleep. For the rest of that night, I was surely staying closer to my colleagues. They all knew that I'd been at that school, but none of them asked me any questions about being so shaken up. All I got was one comment. "Well, now you know why we all stay away from that place." Unfortunately, this wasn't the last time I had to go there, and it wasn't the only thing I experienced there. I'll upload some more stories about this school another day. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please discuss your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel for a feast of grim and grisly content. I'm your host, Severed Soul.